Welcome to another edition of the Hail to Michigan podcast. I'm your host tonight, Matt, joined tonight by Contown. Contown, how are you?
Doing good. Had a good Christmas break, good holiday season going on right here. Getting my holiday fluff on. Coaches want me podcasting at 2:30 next year, so trying to get a head start on that. And yeah, life's good.
Oh man, I I feel you on that. I am ready to not have leftovers endlessly from whatever holiday is up. But been a nice little break for college football. It feels like bowl season's been going on for a while, but feels like it's back into the heavy swing of it right now. And we're going to cover today. We're going to cover the Iowa game just briefly. It's been so long ago. We're into Georgia week, a lot on the line. So we're going to focus heavily on Georgia, but let's talk about Iowa a little bit first. Give me some of your takeaways from Michigan's performance, kind of the overall, atmosphere of it. I feel like it's still, even since post Ohio State, I guess it's really felt like kind of just a lingering good feeling surrounding the program. And then obviously gearing up for the playoff. What were some of your key takeaways from the Iowa game?
I thought both teams had a decent game plan to start. Michigan had obviously been using or waiting for the perfect time to use that halfback pass from Donovan. They said they'd had it in the playbook for quite a while, and he never missed it in practice. And that combined with the long quorum run to start the game gave Michigan a lead, which it was going to be important to establish a lead and really take away. Iowa's already coming into this game from a limited abilities on offense. So if you can establish a quick lead, as the more talented, more explosive team, this was going to be a really hard game to lose for Michigan. And they did that with just enough in the first half. And then they made better adjustments, I thought, than Iowa did at halftime. Basically, the offensive success Iowa was having in the first half was set up by the limited rushing game they had going, and then the hard bootlegs off of it that was attempting to take Aiden Hutchinson, attempting to take Michigan's pass rush out of the game, and get the ball out on the perimeter to their tight ends. And Michigan adjusted to that in the second half, and Iowa really had nothing. They weren't going to let Aiden and Ojabo, tee off on the quarterback. So they spent a lot of the day in their quick passing stuff, and then that's not really their forte. So you get the lopsided outcome that you got. And like you said, it kind of feels like it's kind of like a dream, Michigan goes out and gets revenge for these last 10 years against Ohio State, kicks their ass up and down the field in the second half, and then does the same thing to Iowa to win our first outright Big Ten championship in 17 years. Everything's coming up Michigan the last month here.
Yeah, it felt a little hairy there in the first half, especially the first quarter. Outside of the big plays, it didn't feel like Michigan was moving the ball very well. And I was kind of willing to get into that rock fight. And it was just kind of like, just an uncomfortable feeling. And just like, not this Iowa stuff again. And even at the end of the third quarter, it felt well in hand then, but it was only 21-3. Michigan only put up 21 at that point, and then they just exploded in the fourth quarter. Tight ends really got involved in the passing game in the fourth. But just overall, we talked a little bit about it in the preview, and this is going back like a month now. But we talked about their quarterback controversy still going on going into the Big Ten championship, and it was just like, look, if that comes home to roost basically in the game against Michigan, it's not going to be good for Iowa, and that's exactly what happened. They had to switch over to Padilla in the second half. His completion percentage looks pretty decent, but it was for 38 yards. Averaging 2.5 yards of completion. So it just didn't feel like they had the horses to keep up. Kind of all throughout the game. I thought the play calling. You mentioned a little bit. The game plans. I thought Gaddis's play calling, the sequencing of things, the mixing in plays at the right time. The obviously you mentioned the Edwards pass. It just felt, especially as the game wore on, it felt like he just pushed the right buttons at the right time. I don't think anyone individually really stood out as a huge game. It just felt like everyone played pretty good, and Iowa didn't have the horses to keep up. Just a little aside on Iowa. I don't know how, when as the head coach, when you're evaluating that team, you can look at them and say, our defense is pretty good. Our special teams are always top 5 in the country, but our offense is terrible. And just keep moving forward with that and that being okay. Maybe it's a product of his job security, but and obviously it's his son that's running the offense, but that offense, it just is going to hold them back forever.
It almost seems like Iowa is content to and Ferentz is content to play for like having a meaningful season like every 3 or 4 years. And in this game, it felt like there was no sense of urgency once it got to 21-3, 28-3 from Iowa. They didn't they didn't abandon the run. Not that they even have it in the playbook and the personnel to play from 18 or 25 down, but they didn't, change up their play calling or become significantly more aggressive to try to come back in this game. Like it just feels like sometimes Ferentz is like content to be there.
Yeah.
He made his Big Ten champion, and I was, when you're his stature in the state of Iowa and you're making the money he's making and you've, been there as long as he has and won as many games as he has, I guess that's, why try? But yeah, it's I was happy to, show up every 3 years. You get a Rose Bowl or a New Year's Day Bowl, and if you're never worse than like 6-6 or 7-5, and sometimes you'll turn in a 9-3 or a 10-2 and call it good, I guess. I agree with you on it did feel a little hairy in the middle. When it stagnated at 14-3, and especially when Cade threw the interception, which it was a bad ball. It was behind Eric All, but it wasn't an uncatchable ball, and it got like the perfect Iowa ricochet right, like directly into the linebacker's arms. So that's when it kind of was like, all right, we've really only moved the ball in 2 big plays. One was a trick play. And like Iowa just got the type of bounce they needed, or they need basically to beat the better teams when they pull off those types of upsets. So it did feel hairy then, and Cade felt a little uncomfortable for a stretch, seeing the field, I thought, but kind of regrouped at halftime, and then eventually, just like you said, Iowa didn't have the horses. The floodgates opened up.
Yeah, and I'm not sure on the total yardage breakdown in the second half. But you mentioned it a little bit, the halftime adjustments, and we've talked about this off air. The halftime adjustments defensively, I mean, they started clamping down on the boot, and that was it. I mean, that's all they had available, and it's really when they went over to Padilla, I mean, and Gavin Williams a little bit too. But Padilla only had 38 yards. Williams had 56. Like, were they under 100 in the second half? Under 100 yards of offense. I mean, it was over. They weren't going to move the ball anymore once Michigan made their halftime adjustments. And then when Michigan gets hot there in the fourth, then it's just pouring it on. I mean, it was over at 21-3, and Michigan made it look real ugly then at the end. So I thought a few guys kind of stood out, both positive and negative, on defense. I thought DJ Turner had another pretty solid performance. On the other hand, I thought that Colson, Junior Colson, was kind of picked on a little bit, which can happen to a freshman linebacker, especially with a lot of boot action. With that kind of style of play, it can kind of mess with the young linebackers a lot. And he actually got pulled in the game. I think we both think Junior is going to be great, but he's still going through kind of the learning curve there. And I thought the defensive line, interior especially, we talked about this in weeks, a few weeks back here, but they dominated Iowa's guards. And Iowa's guards aren't great, but it's still a program that prides itself on its offensive line. And Michigan, I mean, Aiden and Ojabo did their usual business, but Hinton and Mozzie were dominant against Iowa.
Yeah, it's not the best Iowa offensive line that Francis had, but the strength is the interior, and they're obviously led by an All-American at center. And then in our preview, we mentioned I believe he's the right guard. Schott is also a very high level player, and Chris Hinton had a great game. Mozzie Smith had a great game going against an All-American most of the day, especially considering for Mozzie's case, considering who he was going up against in Linderbaum. The Michigan interior D line really showed out against the strength of Iowa's offensive line. And then you mentioned it, going to the other side of the ball, you mentioned them already, but the tight ends for Michigan, I thought played very well. And Luke Schoonmaker actually had two phenomenal catches. Obviously the one-handed catch is the one that people are going to remember, but the throw and catch on the seam, Cade fit it in a tight window, and Schoonmaker took a shot and held on. And I mean, that's kind of tight end porn, if you will. Throw it to the big burly dude on the seam and hit him as hard as you want, but we're knocking on the goal line now. So yeah, fun. It was just monkey off the back type thing. It was just like a huge relief, and happy for those who stayed. As the saying goes, the Aiden Hutchinsons and Brad Hawkins and everyone who's Hassan Haskins, everyone who's seen the dark days of triple overtimes against Rutgers with no one in the stands, and all the complaints about losing to Ohio State. Just can't be any happier for the guys that have put in the work to accomplish that.
Well said there. Well said. Anything else from the Iowa game before we move on?
Nope.
All right, let's get into Georgia. Michigan plays Georgia on Friday night down in Miami. Um, huge matchup. And I think it's interesting that at least offensively, like from a style standpoint, Michigan and Georgia are very similar to each other. Defensively, Georgia defense has been the talk of the season. But just overall program wise and structure wise, these are very similar teams. Georgia's obviously been one of the elites in terms of recruiting class and star power. I want to get into the specifics on each side of the ball, but before we get there, just kind of your overall thoughts on, I guess not only Georgia but the field, the playoff in general this year, and then how Michigan kind of stacks up as a program compared to Georgia, and then the other groups in the playoff.
Yeah, so I think this is the most. I want to say it's the most interesting playoff that there has been so far. The first one is obviously incredibly interesting because it's the first. I think there's been playoffs where top to bottom, the teams are closer in terms of talent and accolades. But in terms of intrigue, you have two teams who have never been to the playoff. The other two teams played each other in the conference championship game that, in a way, felt like a national championship game less than a month ago. And those two teams also happen to be two of the three most talented teams in the country by 24/7's talent composite. I actually think they're 1 and 2. I think Georgia's number 1 and Alabama's number 2. And then there's a little bit of a drop off from those two to Michigan, who's about 15th in the talent composite. And then there's another drop off to Cincinnati, who's obviously the first group of 5. So it's interesting. You have these two Titans who have been to the playoff multiple times, and obviously Bama seems to win it every other year. And then you have these two newcomers, and yet it doesn't feel like a lopsided playoff. I wouldn't bet my house.
Yeah, I think that kind of runs. Right. I think that kind of runs similar to how the season's been. Yeah. The smart guy that I am, I predicted, before the year, I think it was Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, and Alabama. And I predicted most of them to be, undefeated or, 12-1. And it just kind of throughout the year, just seemed like some of the, Clemson really stumbled this year. Ohio State, obviously 2 losses, which doesn't happen very often for them. Even Bama with mid-season loss, it's just kind of it's just felt like a year that's kind of, I don't know, open for the taking. Just kind of waiting for a team to take the throne, and I don't think, regardless of who the champion is this year, I don't think it'll be one that's kind of looked at as one of the best championship teams of the last 10 years. It just kind of feels like it's an kind of an open tournament. I don't think Cincinnati can win 2 games against these teams. But I think all three of the other teams in the playoff could win it. And that's not always the case. And when it is the 3 other ones, it's like the 4th one has no chance. It seems like the big 3 and little 1 usually, which might still hold accurate this year, but it's just been an interesting year, and I think that kind of led us to an interesting playoff field.
And the teams that were knocking on the door of the playoff were also not necessarily your typical powers. I mean, Notre Dame was right there, but without a conference championship game, it would have been, taking the right things, breaking their way. But, the other team that was right there was Oklahoma State.
Right.
Has obviously never made the playoff. I don't know that they've won the Big 12. I don't think they've won the Big 12 championship game since they instituted the Big 12 championship game. They almost never beat Oklahoma. They're been in a similar boat there to the last 20 years from Michigan against their chief rival. So yeah, all around, really, Josh Pate over at 24/7 keeps calling it the Renaissance year, and it feels that way a little bit. It's like coming out of the weird year that we had last year in 2020. It's like a lot of open doors for programs that have kind of been hanging around like the top 20 to sneak into maybe being perennially in that top 7, top 5 going forward.
Absolutely. Let's get into Georgia specifically here. Let's start with the more well-known side. Let's start with the Georgia defense. Obviously loaded with talent. There's been people out there saying that all 11 starters could eventually be drafted. That they're talented in the front. The linebackers are probably the inside guys, probably the two of the better linebackers, the top 10 in the whole country, with Nakobe Dean probably being number 1. Tell me a little bit about Georgia's front 7 group. What your thoughts are on their front 7 from an individual player standpoint, and then what we should expect to see schematically from Georgia.
Yeah, so you touched on it. There's not really a weak spot on this defense in terms of what a normal team might consider a weak spot. There's no whatever the exhaust hole in the Death Star. It's not that. Like their worst player is going to be like 129 teams like best player. So it's really Kirby Smart has built on this side of the ball a testament to recruiting rankings matter. Recruiting is the lifeblood of the program. Georgia's the number 1 team in the talent composite, and a lot of their talent, because of Kirby's background and just how they've built their program skews towards the defense. Not to say that the offense isn't talented, because it really is, but it's really absurd. The future NFL players they're trotting out. And the other thing is they play a lot of guys. I mean, it's not 11 NFL players and then a big drop off to the twos. They're playing regularly like 15 to 18 guys who, even those next 3 to 6 are probably going to be, make NFL rosters, if not be high draft picks. So it starts up front. They're a big group up front. They run, it's not your typical 4-man front, and we can get into the schematics a little bit more. It'll look like an even front at times, but it really starts with the 3 bigger 3-point guys in the D line in Trayvon Walker, Jordan Davis, and Devontae Wyatt. They're all, I think Devontae Wyatt is listed as the shortest of the 3 at 6'3", and then Walker and Davis go 6'5" and 6'6", and they're all just really big dudes. Walker 6'5", 290, Devontae Wyatt 6'3", 315, and then in the D line, the guy that everyone has heard about is Jordan Davis at 6'6", 330. I think he's bigger than 330.
I do
they list
too.
him at 330, and that's kind of like Michigan used to list Unwenu at like 350, and anyone who ever saw Mike Unwenu knew he wasn't 350. So he's a big dude. But the thing about all these guys, and especially Walker and Wyatt, is they're not just like big old pieces of meat that Georgia puts in front of your O-line that you have to run around. They're athletic dudes. Walker and Wyatt will stunt. They'll slant the line. These are guys that can move. Every once in a while, Walker will drop into coverage. He'll go cover a flat.
Insane.
Yeah, like these are people that shouldn't be able to move as well as they do for this size. Davis is a little less of an athlete. Not less of an athlete, but less. He's less. They'll do fewer things with him. But just because of his size, he's an incredibly effective run defender. Because the downside to being that big, he can get tired. He actually plays fewer than 40% of Georgia's snaps. Not that much of a pass rush threat, and they'll lift him off the field in obvious passing situations and whenever he needs a breather. So it's a big group up front, and they do a lot of keeping the linebackers clean. And you mentioned the inside linebackers are the real strength of this team. The front, and especially Jordan Davis, get a lot of attention, but I think Nakobe Dean is probably the best player on this team, offense or defense. He's might remind some Michigan fans of Devin Bush. He's a little bit on the smaller side, but he's just incredibly fast and incredibly mean. About 6 foot 220, and he's gonna make plays all over the field. I mean, he flies around out there, and he's really fun to watch. Up until Friday when he's gonna be playing against us. But great front seven, super talented. Davis is the least talented of in terms of recruiting rankings of the bunch, and he's the one that's getting all the accolades in December here. So kind of an embarrassment of riches for this Georgia front seven.
Yeah, and Nolan Smith, I forgot that he was part of this group. Really, he was, if I remember correctly, he was a top 3 player in his whole class.
Yep.
And he's kind of the forgotten man. I just forgot it myself. So it's funny you mentioned Davis's weight. I was on our lads looking at their depth chart, and they list him as 360 verified. So you might be right on the bigger than 330 with him. And if you've seen pictures of him, I think it's with Devontae Wyatt. I'm not sure which teammate he's next to. But
yeah,
the guy he's next to is a massive person, and Davis makes him look like he's like a fullback.
It's ridiculous.
He's twice the size of him.
Yeah,
and I agree with your take on Nakobe Dean. I think he's just and Quay Walker too. I was reading a piece probably mid-season that was talking about all the draft prospects on their defense, and some of the scouts are in love with Quay Walker. It was kind of an inside piece on The Athletic about, I believe it was the Senior Bowl discussion, and they were just talking about how Dean gets a lot of the hype for their inside backers, but that Quay Walker is every bit as talented from an NFL projection standpoint. So very talented up front. Michigan, especially on the interior of the line, is going to have their hands full. It will be very interesting to see if Michigan kind of tries to use their Michigan's offensive line ability to be versatile against them. With guys that big on the front, one of the ways to mitigate that is kind of to run stretch zone, but that may be a little difficult with the speed of their back seven. So that, my first thought of ways to attack is like, I'm not sure if that's going to work based on how they're built. They really haven't. We talked about this a little bit. They really haven't seen a bunch of gap scheme offenses, and Michigan has been pretty versatile in their rushing attack. I don't think there's going to be a ton of success for Michigan to run the ball, but I don't think Georgia has seen a rushing attack as good as Michigan. As they'll see from Michigan on Friday. I think one of the things I should have mentioned before we really started getting into this is when we talk about Georgia's weaknesses, it's important to keep in mind that these are relative weaknesses. If we think they have a weak spot here or there, it's kind of like when we discussed Ohio State. weak spot to them is not like when we're talking about a weak spot with Nebraska.
Right.
It's probably still a pretty good player. It's just one of their weaker spots there. With their defensive backfield, they run kind of a similar style to Michigan, kind of a nickel look. A lot of 5 defensive backs. They call their Dax Hill position a star, and that's been manned most all year by Latavius Brinney, who's a very good player. Actually, they're one of the main reasons that Otis Reese left Georgia, but he did not play in the SEC championship game. And they brought in William Poole, who, according to Pro Football Focus, that was where Alabama had a good amount of their success. And obviously, Jameson Williams had a big game, but a lot of it was out of the slot. According to Pro Football Focus, the slot defender for Georgia allowed 168 yards, 10 catches, and a touchdown. And that is a huge drop off from what Brinney was. So if he can't go on Friday, I do think that is an area where Michigan can, whether it's with the running backs, the tight ends, or even some of the slot guys, Michigan can attack. What are your thoughts on Georgia's kind of back 5 group, their defensive backfield, and Michigan's ability to attack them?
Yeah, it's just to pick up on the star position there, the unknown status of Latavius Brinney. The coverage grade between the two, between Brinney and Poole, is a 20-point drop off on according to Pro Football Focus on the season. So, yeah, that's it's a massive matter of import as to whether Latavius Brinney is going to be able to go for Georgia in this game. And obviously that showed in the SEC championship game. This is like we talked about relative weakness. This is the relative soft spot of the defense. And by relative soft spot, I mean, it's still all 5 stars and, some level of all SEC type players. In the cornerbacks, they're led by the true outside cornerbacks, disregarding the nickel player and the star for Georgia. They're led by Darien Kendrick, who was on Clemson until last year, transferred to Georgia for this season. I think he's the better of the 2 corners. I don't think he's the best corner that Michigan is going to see this year, but he's probably top 3, certainly top 5. He's a very good player, and he will certainly be an NFL draft pick. He's not. I don't think he's elite, but I think he's very good. And then on the other side, they'll start Keely Ringo or Kelly Ringo. He was a very highly rated recruit, but he's I think certainly the lesser of the 2. He's a good player. He's a physical player. He's a big, very big corner. But I think he can get beat at times. I think he's that's a potential one-on-one matchup that if Michigan's going to have any success in the passing game, they're going to have win the one-on-ones with Kelly Ringo, especially when you can scheme up opportunities to take shots there. In terms of the safeties, they're led by Lewis Sine, who's at one point in time a huge recruit for Michigan. The recruitment faded a bit, but seemed like early on, especially when he was still out in New England, was going to be a major target for Michigan, and he moved down south. I think he wound up in Texas, if I'm remembering correctly, but and obviously ended up at Georgia. He's been a very good player for them. All around safety. He's a physical guy. He can come up and run support. He's good in coverage. And then the other safety is, I believe, Christopher Smith. They've played Christopher Smith in is ahead of Dan Jackson in snaps, but both have played a majority of the games. And Dan Jackson has played in every game actually. So, but mostly you're going to cover 4. Like any team that runs, their base personnel is a tight defense. And we can talk about the tight versus kind of the mint package that Georgia runs within that, what you would consider the tight defense. They're going to run cover 4 on the back end, 4 shell, if you will. It's going to look like too high a lot, but they're mostly going to be running quarters and, the variations of quarters that Nick Saban teaches his defensive backs, because Kirby Smart obviously comes from the Nick Saban tree. That's going to be a lot of quarters. And then every once in a while they'll run cover 2, and very rarely they'll go one high man, but it's a good secondary. It's one of the better secondaries that Michigan's seen this year. I don't think they're quite as a unit on the level of Penn State, but after Penn State, I would struggle to name a better secondary that Michigan has seen than this Georgia secondary.
Yeah, I think you really covered most of it there on the back end. One thing in relation to the pass defense, their edge rush, pass rush in general is just okay. It's more of a well-rounded group than what Michigan has seen with two dominant players. Ever since Adam Anderson had some off-the-field issues, they really have missed kind of the edge rush presence. Nakobe Dean is actually the sack leader, and they kind of create their pressure by stunts, delayed blitz, kind of a one-man delayed blitz, adding a guy to the front, as opposed to bringing 6 or bringing 7. It usually still ends up being a 4 or 5-man rush, and they kind of rush the passer as a team more so than an edge one-on-one against a tackle. What are some of the keys in your mind for Michigan's offense to have success against this defense?
So it's interesting, the big, like, glaring strength of the Georgia team, not that they only have one, but is the run defense, right? And it's kind of like, good on good, but if you're a Michigan fan that's been around for a little while now, you're probably a bit jaded or a bit nervous at times, and you might look at this Georgia front and say, this is where the Michigan run game finally falters, and it's just too much to handle for this Michigan front. I don't think I think this Georgia front is great. I don't think Michigan is going to run, not nearly as well as they did against Ohio State. I don't think it's even necessarily going to be a 200-yard rushing game, but I think Michigan is going to have more success on the ground than people might think at first blush, just given the Georgia front's reputation and the stats. Because as of right now, the numbers back up the reputation for Georgia. The numbers are fantastic, but I don't think they've seen a rushing attack that is as diverse as Michigan's can be. A lot of the teams that Georgia has gone up against have really just thrown zone at them, a lot of inside zone and split zone as the changeup. Whereas Michigan is a team, and it's very rare in college football, just given, the nature of what personnel you have and the amount of practice time you have. But Michigan is one of the few teams that is, actually quite proficient in both zone and gap schemes. And there haven't been a lot of teams that have, and really to my eye watching this year, Georgia, there haven't been any teams that have thrown both gap and zone run schemes at Georgia throughout the course of a 60-minute game. So I think one key in terms of the run game is to, keep it diverse and mix up calls. I think especially in terms of the gap scheme, throw more gaps at Georgia than their front has seen all year. Counter is a play that you can actually have some success against a tight front with. And for those who don't know, Georgia, a front that they're going to run out a lot is, they'll run what's called a mint, which is within the tight family of defense, a mint package. And they're basically running the three big D linemen that we talked about in 4 eyes, which is, head up or inside shade on the tackles. And then they'll put the nose, Jordan Davis, in either head up on the center or in a 1. And then they'll run a jack who's kind of like what Michigan used to run under DJ Durkin with like a stand up. We called it a buck at the time, but he's kind of like a detached edge player. And that's going to be Nolan Smith, and they'll rotate there as well. But it's going to be a lot of, a lot of Nolan Smith. So this front that Georgia's going to run, one of the gap schemes that is going to be, one of the better ways to attack this front of Georgia's is going to be counter, which is obviously the staple of a lot of Michigan's success on the ground this year, and obviously Georgia's preparing for that. So in the month off, I'm sure Michigan is going to has come up with new wrinkles to throw in. But I just think the diversity of the run game for Michigan is going to be key, and not being predictable in the play calling. And then in the passing game, I think it's going to be, part of the passing attack is going to be to break tendency a little bit. When Jordan Davis is on the field, throw more on first down, because that's, kind of chicken and the egg. That's when Jordan Davis is going to be on the field more. And get the front moving side to side, because they're big, and we talked about them being athletic, but the edges, if you can get there, is another way to attack the type of defense that Georgia's going to run, and it's a way to kind of substitute the inside run game to not run into the teeth of that Georgia D line all night. You can kind of sub the inside, some of the run game for quick passing game and screen game on the perimeter. And we talked about weaknesses being relative for Georgia. I think that's an area that Michigan can be efficient. I don't think Michigan is going to, light them up on the perimeter, but, working end arounds and quick receiver screens on the edges will be a key area for Michigan to have success in if they're going to replace some of the ground that you necessarily have to give up to Georgia on the interior.
Yeah, especially if with Brinney out, right? I mean that,
right?
Our slots aren't historic. AJ Henning, has been kind of a gadget player to an extent. Being able to attack and use his skill set in the quick game, things like that, especially when their top nickel cover corner is potentially out, that could be an advantage. I think it's going to be important to stay on schedule. You mentioned it a little bit, with the throwing on first down, and Michigan has been very good at limiting tackles for loss. But if they get into kind of the second and long, or third and medium to third and long, it's going to be a rough night for them, I feel. So it's important to stay on schedule. I think there will be big plays to be made, and that doesn't necessarily mean long touchdowns. That means when in the run game, when the hole's there, we pop a hole for Corum, get a 20-yarder, get a 15-yarder, those type of things to kind of keep the momentum rolling, while also staying on schedule is going to be important. I think one of the things we talked about prior to recording was, I was very nervous when Michigan played Alabama a few years ago in the Citrus Bowl about the offense being physically overmatched, and then they weren't, and I thought Michigan schemed up a very good game, and obviously very similar defense to Alabama. Kirby Smart comes, might as well have been born next to Saban. Just the way they play, the way they think and operate defensively. Michigan put up 395 yards against Alabama in that game. Only 16 points. But if you remember, Shea was very, very off that game. There were a lot more yards left on the field. So I think, despite the prowess of Georgia's defense, I think, not that Michigan-Alabama game has a ton of relevance, but I don't think it's going to be impossible to move the ball against them. I think Gaddis seemed to scheme up a very good game in that bowl game in terms of knowing the checks, knowing kind of how to attack this style of defense. So I think staying on schedule and hitting the big plays when they're there are the two big keys for me on offense. Anything else about the Georgia defense before we switch over to the offensive side of the ball for them?
I would just say, like, to your last point about, it's not going to be, there's yards. There will be yards to be had. The team that had the most success against Georgia on the ground this year was actually Florida. Mm-hmm. Only 4 teams hit 100 yards total on the ground, and that's not sack adjusted. I think actually Georgia Tech and maybe South Carolina get there if you take out sacks. But Florida is, if you watched any Florida this year, you know that Florida was an abject mess, a mess at basically every level. And it didn't have a great offensive line. And Michigan grades out in almost every way better than Florida on the ground. Florida doesn't have Michigan doesn't have a quarterback that can run like either of Florida's. JJ is obviously a better runner than Cade is. But this is a Georgia defense that I think it's not everything that it's been built up to be. That doesn't mean it's not the best defense in the country, but it's not. I think there are signs that should give some Michigan fans hope, as we've both alluded to at this point, that it's not an exercise in futility to run on this team. Damian Price, Florida's lead back, ran for almost 8 yards per carry that day. And obviously, like almost every other opponent Georgia played, Florida had to abandon the run because they got behind with a disastrous second quarter. They missed at least one field goal early and just eventually had to abandon the run. But Florida's lead back was almost running for a first down every time he touched the ball. And Florida almost got to 200 yards rushing. So this is not a game Michigan should go into nervous and or lacking any confidence in terms of their rushing game. And we've heard some players, make some comments that back that up. That tell us that they won't. So expect Michigan to not abandon the run. No matter what the score is early, like Michigan's gonna be Michigan, I think, throughout this game.
Yes, I think you said it very well there. I think they are very much an elite defense, but in the 4 games that I've watched of them, there are plays to be had. They're not, this shut down. It's going to be, tough sledding to even get first downs. I think Michigan will be able to make plays. You just have to hit them when they're there. And I do think, I don't know, but I think those corners can be had by our wide receivers. And I think if you can stay on schedule, that gives you more of a chance to test their pass defense a little bit more than some of their previous opponents have been. And I think, Alabama showed that, and Alabama does have James Williams and the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. But I do think they showed that Georgia's pass defense is susceptible for to get kind of lit up a little bit. So it's a fascinating matchup, and I think it can go a lot of different ways. So looking forward to that matchup. Let's switch over to the offensive side of the ball for Georgia. As I mentioned a little bit in the start of the preview, they're very similar to Michigan. If you look even down to some of the stats, I mean, Cade has almost 2,500 yards. Stetson Bennett has just over 2,300, just over 2,300 yards. If you look at the running backs, they have 700 yards, 600 yards, 300, 250, 240. Michigan's got, 1,200, 900, and two 160s. It's like, Michigan's throwing the ball for almost 3,000 yards. Georgia's throwing the ball for just over 3,000 yards. Georgia's ran it for 2,500. Michigan's ran it for 2,900. It's a very similar in terms of offensive output and even style to Michigan. Let's start with the quarterback. Give me your thoughts on Stetson Bennett, walk-on quarterback for Georgia. He is listed at 5'11", 190 pounds, and I guess throw in your JT Daniels quick assessment as well.
Well, just on Daniels, I think because of how the SEC championship game went, and then obviously, the background of JT Daniels, 5-star quarterback, had some success at USC before being injured. We've seen him at times at Georgia, but has really never been able to, for whatever reason, health, attitude, adjusting to the, learning the playbook, whatever it is, has never really been able to take over that job. And so if you squint, you can almost see a similar situation to Cade and JJ at Michigan. Further the mirror image, the Spider-Man meme of these two teams. But I really don't think it's quite the same situation. This is Stetson Bennett's team. I don't really buy too much into the mystique that people are trying to drum up around, who's going to come out at quarterback for this game for Georgia. This team operates best when Stetson Bennett is at quarterback, regardless of what happened in the SEC championship game. Now, that being said, Stetson Bennett is not, I don't think he's going to be an NFL quarterback. He's not the best quarterback that Georgia has had. We've seen some really good signal callers there in Athens. But he makes the offense run. He's a walk-on, typical cliches apply. He's gritty. He's had to, be a very smart player at the position. But, he's not just watching the Alabama game and making that your entire opinion of who Stetson Bennett is or what his capability is at quarterback would be a mistake. I think he's a fine player. Drawing comparisons to Cade at Michigan, he's a more mobile player than Cade. He does give you something on the ground more so than JT Daniels does. He's obviously not going to wow you getting off the bus. He's a very slim player, smaller build, 5'11", he's very slim. But he kind of just gets the job done, does what needs to be done. I don't even think the comparisons to Cade are apt. I don't mean to imply any, because I think Cade is a different player. He was a much more highly rated recruit, and they're different in many ways. But Stetson is, you might call him a game manager, but I think he's a decent athlete, and he's a smart player, and he generally doesn't make a lot of mistakes. And he's been the perfect quarterback to get Georgia to where they are right now. So I don't think there's a quarterback controversy in Athens. I think it's going to be Stetson Bennett, and I don't think he's going to be in the top 4 or 5, maybe even 6 quarterbacks that Michigan has seen this year. But he's given the talent around him, and given the position that the defense is going to put their offense in, he's a great quarterback for this team.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. We talked a little bit before. It's amazing a team as talented as this Georgia roster is, is relying on a former walk-on quarterback. But I think that just goes to show, a little bit about Bennett's leadership. As you said, it's his team. I don't think there's any controversy either. The only way I really even see Daniels playing is if Georgia gets behind and whatever they're trying offensively isn't working. Certainly lacking in terms of arm talent compared to some of the guys that Michigan has faced. But, what he can do with his legs, keeping drives alive. He's the right guy for this team. Let's get into their running backs or the running game in general a little bit. Kind of a group of 4 guys for Georgia. They had loaded running back rooms in the past. This is another very, very good room with kind of a variety of skills. Kendall Milton, I believe, is still injured, but Zamir White, James Cook, Kenny McIntosh, and I always forget the 5th guy's name, but he's played a lot in garbage time this year. I
think it's Darien Edwards.
That's right. That's it. I knew as soon as I heard it. Yep, Darien Edwards. Yep. As soon as I heard it, I knew it'd be. I could say it was right or not, but I think overall White is the most talented runner, but he has been getting. I believe their play-by-play guy said White has had only 17 carries over the last 3 games, which is a little bit surprising considering he's been the lead back all year. But James Cook is the real danger man to me. I think White is more of kind of your bruising back and probably the most talented runner. But James Cook's versatility is a real asset to them. Very similar to what we have with Donovan Edwards. Earlier in the season, it was kind of when Cook comes out onto the field, alert, that this guy, whether they're running a trick play for him or they're throwing him the ball or, whatever the case may be. And now he's kind of developed into a more well-rounded back. Anything else on Georgia's running backs? Anything you want to touch on specifically there? Good group, but not, I don't think some of the killers of the previous Alabama groups or even previous Georgia with a Todd Gurley.
The Gurley, Michelle, or was Gurley and Michelle ever overlap? It was Chubb and Michelle too.
Gurley, Chubb, and Michelle were all on the same team. Yes.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, store brand version of that Georgia running back room. You're right. Your numbers that you were citing were right. Zamir White has had 17 carries over the last 3 games. He's only had double-digit carries once in the last 5 games for Georgia. In the middle of the season, that stretch of like Florida, Kentucky, Auburn, Arkansas, he was used a little bit more. And, that might make some sense in terms of the type of opponent they were seeing. I mean, those were kind of like the bigger, more physical defenses in the meat of their SEC schedule there. And then down the stretch, like you mentioned, James Cook has really come on. And James Cook is Dalvin Cook's brother, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So great bloodlines. It makes sense that he's panning out. He was obviously a well-regarded recruit, and it seems like he's really surged late in the year for them. So, like you said, very good group. Not the elite group. I don't think there's a first-round draft pick in this room, but the tandem of Cook and White are, difficult to deal with. I loved Zamir White's high school film. I'm not the only one. I think he was a 5-star, but he was. I mean, these are two very, very talented individuals, and Zamir White goes by Zeus. You're going to hear Georgia fans, it'll sound like they're booing at some time, but they're yelling Zeus. And that's really fun. So, Zamir White, I do think, really struggles in pass protection. I don't think Cook is some kind of ace, but I think the worst grade any player on like Georgia's top 20 something players snap wise on offense has on Pro Football Focus is Zamir White's pass protection grade. So part of the issue that might be behind why White has ceded some snaps down the stretch here might be his pass protection, especially a game like the Alabama game where it was a close game and they were behind and they were having to throw more. So that could be something to look for in this game if Michigan is even or leading with Georgia.
Yeah, and that's they really don't rely on Cook to pass block either. They just bring him in and they put him out in a route.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's something certainly to keep an eye on. Let's talk a little bit about their receiving core, and then we'll get into the O-line kind of quickly. The O-line, I guess, of the whole team is kind of the least heralded unit of all. But let's talk about the receiving core. Obviously, kind of everyone at this point knows about Brock Bowers. He's the biggest threat on the offense in general. They're going to have to know where he's at all times. They move him around a ton. He's versatile. He's big. He can run the ball. He catches about anything. Good route. I mean, he's just all around. He's probably the best tight end in the country, and he's a true freshman. So, probably don't need to talk too much about Bowers. I think everyone knows who and what he is. Give me some information on some of the other receivers, what you saw when you were running through some of their games from earlier this year.
The funniest thing I think with Bowers is they'll hand him the ball. They'll run him on like a jet sweep or like an end around.
Yep.
And it's just like it makes me cackle every time. Like this freshman tight end is like a legitimate run threat for this offense too. So yeah, Bowers is crazy. Lad McConkey is kind of like the most fun weapon for me outside of Bowers on this offense. He's
same.
Like and a lot of that is his name, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Lad McConkey, but
A+ name.
He's more than a name. I mean, he's a legit athlete. He's they'll run the full gamut of of routes with him that you would run with a typical receiver. They'll work him out of the slot a lot. They'll work him on. He had a couple tunnel screens in the SEC championship game. He took one for a touchdown. He averages 15 yards a catch and 5 touchdowns on the year. So he's a good player, and he's gotten a couple handoffs as well on end arounds this year. So another very good player that Bennett will look for. And then to me, kind of the big storyline in the passing game for Georgia is how much healthier can George Pickens get? Preseason, George Pickens in spring ball tears his ACL. It's ACL, right? Not Achilles. Pickens.
I think it was ACL and MCL. It was ACL. It was knee.
Yeah. So knee injury preseason for Pickens, and who, if you don't know, George Pickens, very, very good receiver for Georgia. Very talented, but kind of like a Nico Collins, bigger guy, deep threat. But he was back, kind of dressed for Georgia in like, I want to say week 6 this year. So kind of a miraculous comeback for Pickens. And if you just look like talent wise, he might be the most talented player they have in the wideout room. But he's been pretty limited in his snaps, just coming off this injury down the stretch here. So it'll be interesting to see if this kind of month break allows him to kind of round back into form a little bit and be used more than just a couple snaps per game. He's gotten 27 snaps over the last 2 games here for Georgia, so they're starting to use him a little more. But if he's more of a full go against Michigan, that's going to add another very dangerous weapon, and make it all the more difficult for Michigan to slow down this offense. Dealing with just Brock Bowers and then sometimes McConkey in the receiving game is one thing, but if you add a 6'3" dude who can really run and high point the ball down the field, it's makes the receiving game all the more dynamic for Georgia. So it'll be interesting to see what Pickens' usage is like against Michigan.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to preview Pickens, right? I mean, it's like he's clearly the most talented receiver they have. He's future high round draft pick, but he's only got 3 catches this year. So it's kind of like, danger man for sure, but he hasn't done it yet. So it's like, okay, well, if that guy's fully functional, then yeah, we've got a lot. Michigan's defense is going to have a lot on their hands, to deal with, but he just hasn't been anywhere close to that. So it's kind of hard to. It's really just kind of hard to discuss him. I'm a huge fan of Ladd McConkey as well. He's not just the first one in, last one to leave. He's legit fast. He's got good hands. He's versatile. Big fan there. Jermaine Burton was a huge recruit. Adonal Mitchell. I thought his name was Adonis, but it says Adonal Mitchell. Watched him a few different games. Noticed him sticking out, I guess. And Kyrus Jackson was a big recruit too. So they've got some players.
Seems like Jackson has ceded a little time to some other options, but the last couple of years, Kyrus Jackson really stood out to me. A very explosive player. But yeah, it seems like he ceded a little bit of time to Burton and Mitchell, and then also the younger guy, Rosemy-Jacksaint, who was a fairly big recruit in his own right.
Yeah, I think Jackson was kind of more of a slot type.
Yeah.
For them, and I think Ladd McConkey's taken some of his minutes too. So, just kind of a well-rounded group. I think their stats don't really pop to you, but similar to how we've discussed with some of the Michigan receivers this year, both of us think Cornelius Johnson's a dude. I don't care that he only has 600 yards. I think he's a great player. I think some of the limited stats is a function of the fact that they spread the ball around so much, and then B, that the quarterback play has been good, not great. You put CJ Stroud on this team, and you've probably got 2,000-yard receivers and probably an 800-yard receiver too. Plenty of talent in that room. The other 2 tight ends, Darnell Washington is a freak. When you see number 0 out there, he's every bit as jaw-dropping physically as Jordan Davis. He is massive, runs well, blocks well. He's going to be a lot to handle. They use him a lot more in the run game, but he is capable in the pass game too. Then the other, John Fitzpatrick, is, from what I've seen, he's a decent player too. So they have a lot of talent at the skill positions on offense. Less so than in Ohio State, kind of different than in Ohio State. But nonetheless, still a lot there. One thing on the passing game too, when Georgia takes deep shots, it's not really like, kind of how Michigan plays, where it's a 40-yard pass with the run after the catch. Georgia launches the ball when they throw deep shots. I mean, they don't mess around with a 25-yard post. It's 45 plus yards down the sideline when they take their shots. So something to keep an eye on there. Keeping things in front will be important on Friday. Offensive line wise, and anything really stand out to you? And to me, Salyer being kind of limited this year and being more of a guard, he's performed well as a tackle, but being more guard shaped, I think that provides an opportunity for the edge rushers for Michigan. Alabama had some success off the edge against them. Anything else about the offensive line really stand out to you?
No, they're almost like, Georgia, and we've seen this a little bit from Georgia. I don't know if this is by design or not, but they seem to have a lot of offensive linemen who are kind of built the same, and they're all just like really athletic, big guys. They don't really like, you can't necessarily look in their offensive line meeting room and tell who's a tackle and who's a guard. Like there's no Ryan Hayeses and Andrew Stubers and Jeffrey Percy's, who are these like towering 6'7" dudes. Everyone's kind of 6'4", 310, 320, and like moves really well.
It's like a 5-guard line.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Michigan's 2019 line.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
A little bit heavier, but
so, yeah, I mean, it's a good unit. It's not a great unit. I think it's like maybe Michigan's clearest advantage in the game is our defensive line against their offensive line. I think certainly on the edges, Salyer and McClendon are very good players. But they're not Aiden Hutchinson level players. And, depending on what package Michigan has on the field, I think Ojabo will be able to get wins in pass pro in his pass rush, no matter if he's going up against Salyer or McClendon. And then I think the interior, I would still give the edge to Smith and Hinton. And I think the interior of their offensive line is the weakness in pass protection. So I do think Michigan will have opportunities to get a good interior pass rush this game, especially if you can, in clear passing situations, get, lift one of the defensive tackles off the field and get, Mike Morris out there, get, one of your NASCAR type packages out there for pass rush. So it's a good unit for Georgia, and obviously their success on offense and especially success in the run game, is what it is. It speaks for itself, but I think Michigan will have the advantage here, and maybe like their most clear advantage in the game.
I agree, and I think the interior of their line is a little bit weak because they're playing their two best guards at tackle.
Yes.
It's just, if Salyer was at guard and McClendon was at guard, we'd be talking, if they had some more capable true tackle body types, I think this line would be much better. But anything else on the Georgia offense? I guess I'd have a point. I think it'll be important for Michigan to confuse Stetson Bennett with pre-snap looks. I think that's one of the things that Bama did best against him, and I think Pro Football Focus had some numbers on the mug looks or simulated pressure looks that were not very favorable to him. I think if you can confuse him, get him into whether it's rush from the pass rush or a look that he thought he saw that was incorrect, that I think that's going to be an important key for Michigan defensively against Bennett specifically, but against their offense overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the ways, if you're playing, if you're coming into a game from a you know talent disadvantage, I don't think Michigan is lacking for talent, but just looking at the numbers, Georgia's probably going to have more NFL draft picks. Their recruiting rankings are certainly higher. One of the ways to even those games is turnovers. So confuse Bennett, and then I think it'll be key. If Michigan's able to get an interception or a fumble, flipping the switch to like return mode and becoming, an offensive player with the ball in your hands. If you're DJ Turner, or if David Ojabo gets a strip sack, like the Georgia defense is so daunting that turnovers will bring the game closer. But if you can get a defensive touchdown or a long return off an interception or a long fumble recovery return, that's going to go a long way. So Michigan's going to need offense from every phase of the game against Georgia. So if you can get scheme up some turnovers and make plays to get turnovers, you have to make the most out of them. So it's not just capitalizing once the offense comes back on the field. It's like taking interceptions can't just be interceptions. They need to be long returns and pick sixes. One of the ways Alabama was able to fend off any comeback from Georgia was the pick six that Bennett threw. So you have to make any few mistakes that Georgia will make. You have to make them big.
Absolutely. Let's get into predictions. We'll start with Ronnie. Let's start with the line first. Michigan 7.5-point underdog. Over under 45.5. Ronnie's prediction for the game is 31-24 Michigan. He says that he thinks Michigan finds a way to attack the middle of the field, causing Georgia to focus on the pass a bit more and open up running lanes for Haskins and Corum. So Ronnie's got 31-24 Michigan. What about you?
So I think right on Selection Sunday, or whatever you want to call it, when we found out we'd be playing Georgia, and the few days after, I was would have taken any line on Georgia. I thought this was a really bad matchup for Michigan, the worst of any of the other playoff teams. I'd rather be playing Alabama or Cincy, or I was really rooting for Oklahoma State to get in or something. But as the game's gotten closer, I've been trending towards a Michigan victory here. I do think Michigan will cover, but to me, I'm kind of just hesitant to pick Michigan against a team that is so talented, and when Michigan doesn't have necessarily the weapons that Alabama does. A lot of the ways Alabama was able to exploit or to have success against this Georgia defense was because of Bryce Young and Jamison Williams, and the things that Bryce Young can do on offense and keeping plays alive. He ran for 40 yards, some key scrambles from him, but also just key, prolonging the play from within the pocket, or prolonging the play, on the move, running the scramble drill and finding guys downfield. I don't see that necessarily on Michigan's roster. I do think we'll see more JJ than we have all season. And I think it's going to take Cade's best game to beat Georgia, but without a Bryce Young and a Jamison Williams on this offense, I don't know that Michigan has enough against this Georgia defense, although I do think it's going to be a close game. Any turnovers, any advantage in the turnover margin for Michigan, I would start to lean to a Michigan win here. And I think Michigan will have some success, but I'm going to go Georgia 27, Michigan 24. My bold prediction is going to be that both teams score non-defensive touchdowns. But I think, the fact that, if Georgia is able to do that on defense, score in a way other than offense, it really tilts the game in their favor. If you told me Michigan scores in the 30s, I think I would take a Michigan to win. But I think I've seen enough of the Georgia defense to think they can hold Michigan to somewhere in the mid to upper 20s and get enough from their offense to eke out a victory. So Michigan covers, and Michigan certainly has a chance to win this game, but I think I'll take Georgia by a field goal.
Yeah, I think I agree with the idea that at the start I did not feel very, very good about the matchup. And as I've dug in a little bit more, watched some more highlights, full game in the case of Alabama versus Georgia, I started to feel more confident, by the day. I think it's going to be an ugly game. And when I say bad matchup, I'm specifically talking about Michigan's offense against Georgia. I think Michigan's defense matches up very well. I think they have. I just don't think Georgia has the amount of weapons to put up a ton of points on this defense. And I think when they're forced to pass, I think our pass rushers can take advantage of kind of a little bit. Salyer's a great player, but I don't think he's a great NFL level left tackle, and that's what you have to be to stop or to slow down Aiden Hutchinson. I think it's going to be a very ugly game, low scoring. I agree with you that we're probably going to see more of JJ than we have. I think his skill set will allow Michigan to take advantage of some of the matchups that they may look to exploit. And I'm just feeling more confident about it than I was, earlier in December. I'm going to say 21-14 Michigan. I think it's going to be very low scoring. I agree with you. If Michigan gets into the 30s, they will win. But I think they're going to do it. Even I think the defense is going to hold up. That's a very low scoring game for today's college football, but I just think it's going to be kind of a nasty knockdown, drag out fight. So I've got 21-14 Michigan. Anything else?
I'll say just quick, even though I'm not predicting Michigan to win this game, I do think if Michigan beats Georgia in the Orange Bowl, that Michigan will win the national championship. Specifically, the offensive defensive matchup here for Michigan, I think, is the worst potential matchup for Michigan of any potential opponent in the playoff. So I do like Michigan's chances in a potential national championship game if they win this game against Georgia. It almost to me feels like a national championship game of sorts. Just I think Georgia is probably the best team in the country despite the loss in the SEC championship game. Alabama was really like the first elite team Georgia saw all year. And I think if they played again, I'd probably still take Georgia. But if Michigan wins this game, I think I like our chances, whatever it is, 10 days later.
That was going to be my hot take.
Sorry.
If they did win, I think they match up better with Alabama than they do with Georgia.
Yes. Yep.
Alabama's more comparable to Ohio State. And I think Michigan can more comfortably run their offense against an Alabama than they can against Georgia. Anything else on the game that we miss that we need to go over here quick, or are you good on this one?
I think I'm good. I'll just say, we briefly mentioned Darnell Washington, but I know he doesn't want to see Andre Seldon again. So Line them up wide at your own risk, Monken.
Absolutely. Yeah, only a couple more days. Getting real excited for this one. So, as always, thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. For Contown, this is Matt. We will catch you with an update next week. Looking forward to this playoff weekend. So, thanks for listening to the Hail to Michigan podcast. And as always, go blue.